watching SpaceX catch a a Starship booster,
Yeah.
and versus watching SLS trundle out to the launch pad,
Right.
at $20 billion a pop. If that doesn't make the point between the difference between high speed innovation done by crazy people versus process driven innovation that, listen, gets us there, but not when your adversary is operating at Starship speed. Um,
You need to check out this epic segment with Palantir co founder Joe Lonsdale and Steve Blank, serial entrepreneur and Stanford professor.
The thing that really gets me, and I see this in so many areas of our country, is it's not just that things are like 50% more expensive or twice more expensive. We're literally spending 10 to 100 times more for the same old results, which is becomes a problem. And so I want to ask Steve, obviously, so you founded the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. You've served on the Pentagon's Defense Business Board. So you're involved in this world. There's widespread agreement in DC on some of the challenges of China and the need to innovate more rapidly. I think it's obvious, right? So people see that. Like, where's the conventional wisdom wrong? Where would you push the department to be more bold? Like what's something controversial that you'd say, here's what you have to do?
Why does it take a wake up call like China to push innovation? Shouldn't inefficiency this extreme be enough to demand bold action on its own?
well, but by the way, we're talking about
Yeah.
Congress.
Yeah.
It's your fault that some of it's broken when you hired Mike Gallagher. Um, you know, so, so Mike was the most cogent and leading advocate for.
Mike's house got swatted by people on the far right, I believe. I mean, he's had a really tough time the last couple of years. So I think the problem in our society is it's very tough to be a politician right now. I think there's some really nasty forces there that encourage people to get out, which is sad.
But he had the most cogent understanding of both the problem and potentially how to solve it. But I'll tell you a couple of ideas. Also sat on the Navy Science and Technology Board, and world class people, dedicated folks in the Navy, and these boards historically come up with world class incremental solutions. Let's give autonomy another $100 million.
The political and societal pressures driving talented leaders out are more than just unfortunate. They're a direct threat to long term progress in tech and security.
Yep.
Well, guys, how much is, let alone a Ford class carrier, 14 billion? But
Yeah.
wait a minute, but how much is a strike group? Great, yeah, and
Yeah.
we're going to give $100 million to more autonomy. Have we thought about what the operating concepts should be when we have
Yeah.
a hybrid fleet? And where are those dollars coming from?
Those dollars are coming from me with Saronic. Exactly. That's the problem
Right.
right now.
But but
Yeah.
but if you think about it, no, they're not, because the DoD budget right now. Here's the other problem. Number one, the DoD budget is thought of as a zero sum game.
Yeah.
That is, if I want to put a couple $1 billion into an autonomous fleet, well, where's that going to come from? My shipbuilding budget is only X. So problem one is the DoD budget is thought of as a zero sum game. That's a massive mistake. We've not engaged the whole of nation in figuring out who should build things.
Yep.
I mean, you understand, and I know some of your listeners do, that the largest satellite manufacturer is not Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or Boeing. It's SpaceX, right? They have a factory that makes this at scale, at a
Yeah.
scale unimaginable that would have made people giggle or,
Yeah.
go like, no,
Yeah.
please stop smoking dope inside the Pentagon.
Yeah.
There's no way you can make 2,000 satellites. Put up 6,000. What are we up to? 6,500? I
Yeah.
mean, that's insane. But wait a minute. How much did that cost the government? It's not that Elon didn't get any money, but no, I mean, that's the paperwork budget that Northrop Grumman, or that's their lobbying budget that
Yeah.
he got.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point is how come as a strategy we haven't engaged and put incentives to private equity, not just venture capital, but private equity at scale, to be investing tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in the new things that we need.
It's almost mind boggling that we're still operating in a world where new entrants like SpaceX are redefining the market, and the defense sector is lagging behind. When a private company is able to build and scale technologies in ways that the government hasn't even begun to imagine, it's a sign that the system is broken.
And is it tax breaks or whatever? And the reason why, by the way, is, do you know the only economists we have in the DoD are the ones working at the Cape, the with green eye shades and whatever. It took two random guys, Jason Rathke and Eric Vollmer, to come up with $1 billion loan authority at Office of Strategic Capital. How
Yeah.
come we don't have 25 economists thinking about crazy things? And
Yeah.
so that's one big idea, is how do we engage the whole of nation? And by the way, we should have understood that when Russia appointed an economist as the head of their defense department, not a general. The light bulb went on
Yeah.
for them. China's been operating civil military fusion for 15 years. We should have figured this out as well. Ash Carter understood this. Is why he stood up DIU. That the integration of all pieces of society. The second part is, DIU has been a Defense Innovation Unit, has been a great science experiment. Now reporting to the SecDev, has $1 billion budget. Hopefully that doesn't go away. Number one is, we should at minimum probably 10x or 20x it, but it's essentially a shadow R&E, that it is Heidi Schu's department, but quicker. But there is no equivalent for acquisition. That
Yeah.
is, we don't have a rapid acquisition budget. Everything goes through the POM and the PBE. That is the
Yeah.
massively complex. Just imagine we threw $50 billion in a DIU for acquisition.
This segment exposes the stark gap between our defense strategy and the pace of global innovation. Competitors like China have spent 15 years refining civil-military fusion, while we struggle to align budgets and processes. Bold moves, such as massively scaling the Defense Innovation Unit or leveraging private equity, are overdue. Without breaking the mold, we risk falling further behind in critical areas like autonomy and rapid acquisition.
That'd be very entertaining for us. One of the big things we're trying to convince people as well, Steve, is that maybe not having a monopsony, having multiple buyers so that you can have competition. Because I think then you could have one
Well,
buyer shame the other buyers.
so the other piece of this is, why don't we have the combatant commands have the authority to kind of buy from that new
Yeah,
acquisition
I love
thing
it.
for anything less than five, or that is, if it's going to be attritable, combatant command should be able to buy from that group. So you asked what kind of crazy ideas that we
Yeah.
could come up with, rather than let's add another couple $100 million to make people happy. But Joe, I'm going to push back to you here
Yeah.
for a second, and not to put you on the spot, but you guys have been at it for decades. There's now a whole set of VCs now operating in this space that followed you guys at 8VC. But we don't speak with one voice. That is, every smart VC has a lobbyist, and some of the bigger companies like Palantir and Andrew have their own lobbyists. But we all go to Washington and we talk with individual voices about our line items, or maybe our space. But Silicon Valley Defense hasn't spoken in as a group. And I don't mean as a group saying, gee, we need more money, but as a group coming up with a set of ideas that, just like I articulated. And my suggestion back to you is, I can't think of anybody better to get a bunch of defense VCs and some creative folks from Andrew or Palantir in a room for a day and say, if we could reorganize the DoD, what would we hand HASC and SASC for language for the NDAA? What would we want? I find myself doing this, but then realize, Congress comes out, visits, we bitch about X or Y, and they go back, and all they heard was bitch, 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 individual item. Does that make sense at all? I don't
Yeah,
mean to
no,
get-
and
Why hasn't Silicon Valley Defense stepped up as a unified voice? Imagine the impact if VCs, companies like Palantir, and creative thinkers came together with a clear agenda to overhaul acquisition processes and empower combatant commands. Couldn't this type of collaboration finally push the DoD into the modern era instead of relying on fragmented lobbying efforts?
I think there are some groups that probably could be better organized. I think it's a fair pushback. I think there are some groups that are saying, what are the high level frameworks? And of course, there's ways we work together. So maybe this is inappropriate to say, but the primes have different incentives sometimes. Sometimes they have the similar incentives to us on some things, but sometimes they have different incentives than us on the innovation side. So for example, a lot of them wanted to defund some more of the innovation things because they didn't like the fact that it was disrupting them. And
Right.
a bunch of us got together. It was a very big victory, and we kept it funded. And we introduced people running DIU to people in the Senate in various places who they hadn't known before. And we were able to keep the funding and even increase it because it was obvious it was working for the country. And so there are ways in which we'll kind of defend and push these things forward. I think you're right. There's some bolder things around, like you said, giving more acquisition money in parallel to combatant command. I'd love to see competition. In my view, if you only have one buyer, then the buyer could do something that's 50 times as expensive, but quote unquote safe and mediocre, and then they get away with it. If you had two buyers and they knew there's a good chance the other one was going to do the thing that shamed them, then they might also take the risk to not look stupid, right? So I think there are things like that we should be putting together to push. And I know some of us have been pushing it a little bit together, but you're probably right. There's ways we can ally and really
I mean,
kind of teach them.
you should.
Isn't this exactly why innovation stalls in defense? When one buyer dominates, there's no urgency to evolve or improve because no one is holding them accountable. Wouldn't introducing multiple buyers create a system where innovation thrives out of necessity, forcing each to prove their worth through smarter, faster, and more cost-effective solutions?
Joe, to be honest, I want to push on you a bit. You are kind of a leading light in the space. Why don't you just call up a bunch of your friends for a weekend and literally have them out to the house and figure out if we could redraw the diagram to compete at speed? What would it look like? Right? Rather than how do I get another $100 million or a couple $1 billion for X and Y? That should still go on. I'm not suggesting we stop lobbying for our individual interests, but collectively, we now know what's broken. And we ought to use the imagination we use to build companies to rebuild the Department of Defense and national security. I think we have enough imagination to do that. And here's the insight. The DoD is built around execution of processes and PBE and whatever. Silicon Valley is built around innovators who create new things that never existed before.
Yep.
And here's the rub. The executors never come up with innovation processes. I mean, they'll do it around the edges, and it's not that we don't innovate incrementally, but innovators at the same time hate coming up with process. Process. I don't need no.
I think Elon especially is like so not
Right.
interested in process, but
So
you're right. The government runs on process though, so we have to fix
So the
it.
problem we're facing is both groups have a Venn diagram of zero intersection in thinking about what radical reform would look like. And I'm sorry to get us on this high horse, but
Yeah.
I think it's incumbent to the innovators to actually come back and say, no, it should look like this if we want to compete with China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Whoever thought we'd be like shooting at Houthis? I mean,
Yep.
how many people could find them on the map?
No.
This really exposes a fundamental flaw in how we approach defense reform. If execution-focused systems dominate the DoD and resist transformative innovation, how do we expect to outpace adversaries like China, where civil-military fusion drives rapid advancements? Isn't it time innovators take the lead in reshaping the system rather than lobbying for piecemeal fixes?
The whole thing is so one-off right now, Steve. You're right. I mean, I literally was on the phone with a congressman 2 nights ago because the head of the Secret Service is working with him to try to do something to try to protect. I'm not going to say who, but you can imagine who's being threatened right now in our country. After they went at them and they need some new technologies we have access to, and it's kind of an embarrassing mess. Like if you want to try to do something competent quickly versus do it the right way. So I think you're right. We need to come up with the frameworks. There's the thing I would say is I do think there's something about big trusted primes run well that's very positive as well. I actually would like there to be 7 or 8 new primes that are really well run and trusted,
And the things you invested in certainly are on that path. You know, that classic consolidation diagram that shows all the primes we had in the 20th century coming down to 10. When I sat with Kath Hicks, I said, ma'am, all you need to do is visualize that diagram flipped horizontally. That is, what we need to do is now generate a whole new set of those things.
Yeah.
And we could use some of that exorbitant billions of dollars that we have on the MDAP list. In fact, my line is that the goal ought to be that 10% of the MDAP, major defense acquisition programs, ought to have new entrants on them in the next 3 years. And if they don't, we're simply not rebuilding the national industrial base. We made a set of semi-logical decisions to consolidate when we thought the Cold War was over and the end of history, et cetera. But we've not made the equal decisions, other than a lot of word salad, to actually put money to kind of recreate that ecosystem, this time using private capital and the equivalent to what Roosevelt and Vannevar Bush did in World War II in handing advanced weapon systems to professors and universities would be handing advanced weapon systems designs to startups.
It's interesting to think about the analogy with the World War II model, where advanced weapon systems were handed off to academia and industry to foster rapid innovation. Could the same strategy work today? Could we, for example, hand off the design of next-gen weapons to startups instead of entrenched defense giants? If we don't evolve our model, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past, where too much power is concentrated in too few hands.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really think about, and I'm not suggesting that, but that's the equivalent of what we did.
This is why instead of the startups, I'd want there to be new trusted primes of a sort that are kind of proven enough. I do agree with your point is that you actually, there's just probably, listen, there's only 2 VC funds that have been doing this for a long time, but then there's probably about 15 new ones in the last several years. And that's great. And these are competent technologists. So I think you could take the top 20, 30, 40, whatever, don't be exclusive, a bunch of VC funds, take the top up and coming companies and include them in the planning, include them in the strategy, right? And there's a pushback on doing that, but it's crazy because that is our biggest asset as a country is all these technologists, and they're not currently included. Like if you tell me that you want to have this certain type of system in 2029, and then there's going to be a competition where a couple of us are going to get funded with a competition in 26, I could then invest right into that, and I could build that, and I could win the competition. So I have been coaching. a bunch of people on all sides around these ideas. I think you're right. It's probably better if we all work together and try to push it together versus separately.
It's refreshing to hear that from not just the established VC funds, but the newer ones emerging in the last few years. This is exactly where the opportunity lies. We don't need to pick a few winners from the existing players. We need to cast a wide net and take the top 20 or 30 from both new and established funds. This broader ecosystem can inject a level of competition and creativity that the system currently lacks. We're talking about building a diversified set of capabilities that can respond quickly and effectively to evolving threats.
Invite the primes because eventually, as much as they're trying to, stiff arm all this, their business model needs to change, right? And some of them understand it, right? You certainly would have Chris Moran of Lockheed in the room and others, and while they're defending their turf of, even Huntington Ingalls understands that the days of only carriers are going to go away. That they understand it. At minimum, it's going to be a hybrid fleet. Right. So having some of them at least understood, at least offer what they're thinking, because they'll try to kill you on K Street anyway. So putting them in the room.
The conversation raises a crucial point about the disconnect between innovation in Silicon Valley and the established processes in the DoD. The real challenge isn't just about securing more funding or pushing for individual interests, but about reimagining how defense acquisition and national security frameworks can evolve. The vision to break down the silos between innovators and the traditional DoD structure is compelling. To stay competitive against global adversaries, we need to adopt a mindset that is more agile, innovative, and disruptive, similar to Silicon Valley's approach. Encouraging cross-sector collaboration is key to addressing the complex security challenges we face today.